is a podcast from the London Statistical Support Team at Office for National Statistics. Its focus is on labour market flows in London. If you would like a transcript of this podcast, please email info@ons.gov.uk. Coming up, we will explain the 3 economic states ONS uses to analyse how the labour market is performing. Labour market flows data show the movement or flows between these economic states. In this podcast, we will examine these flows within the London context. We will then look at the probability of changing labour market status in London. The information used for this podcast comes from the Labour Force Survey, or LFS, which is a survey of households across the UK. We have used longitudinal data from the LFS for this analysis. The ONS produces 2 types of longitudinal data sets, linking respectively 2 and 5 quarters of data. For this podcast, we have used data spanning 2 quarters. And all data are based on the old working age definition, defined as males aged 16 to 64 and females aged 16 to 59. Longitudinal data show movements in London's labour market, and the 2 quarters analysed for this podcast were from quarter 4, or October to December, of 2010 to quarter 1, which is January to March of 2011. There are 3 main economic states in the labour market. These are employment, meaning people who are employed working part-time or full-time in the labour market. This includes employees and the self-employed. Unemployment. This includes people who are currently not in employment but are actively seeking work. And economic inactivity, which includes people not actively seeking work. Examples of economic inactivity include full-time students who are not working while they study, people who are retired, and people unable to work due to long-term illness. Labour market flows data show the movement, or flow as we term it at ONS, between the 3 economic states. That is, the flow between employment, unemployment and inactivity. Looking at labour market flows data for London, we can first see how many people of working age were in employment, unemployment or in economic inactivity at the end of the 2-quarter period we are examining. We can then see how many people shifted between one of the 3 economic states between the 2 quarters. Looking at unemployment, there were 384,000 working age people in London who were unemployed at the end of the 2nd quarter. A further 79,000 working age people moved out of unemployment and into employment, and 62,000 went from unemployment to economic inactivity. For the economically inactive population, 91,000 people moved from inactivity into unemployment, and another 76,000 became employed. 1.2 million people of working age in London remained in economic inactivity over the 2-quarter period. 3.6 million people of working age in London were in employment at the end of the 2-quarter period. A further 61,000 changed their status from employment to unemployment, and 62,000 went from being employed to economically inactive. We will now look at the probability of people in London changing their labour market status from one quarter to another. This is otherwise known as the hazard rate. We will use the same two-quarter period as before to look at the hazard rates for London. As you can see, most people stayed in the same economic state as they had been in the first quarter. Of the three economic states, people in unemployment were most likely to move into another economic state in the two-quarter period. From quarter 4 2010 to quarter 1 2011, 62.3% remained in unemployment, and a further 21.1% moved into employment, and 16.6% became economically inactive. People in employment had the highest majority of those likely to remain in the same economic state, with 96.6% staying employed. 1.7% went from employment to inactivity, and a further 1.7% became unemployed. For inactivity, 86.5% stayed inactive, while 7.3% went from being inactive to unemployed, meaning they started to actively seek work. A further 6.1% became employed in the period. For further information regarding this podcast, please contact the ONS London Statistical Support Team.